I think we're recording. Here we go. Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This is the talk on what's new on nopCommerce version 4.3, and there's actually quite a bit to share here. Let's go ahead and just jump into this. If my screen will let me. There we go. All right. All right, so we're primarily going to walk through the highlight features, meaning that we're going to touch on Facebook Pixel a little bit, just kind of share what that new integration is. Then we're going to look at some aspects of, Dotnet Core for the 3.1 upgrade and why really it was pretty important to move from to what we are currently at in 2.2 to 3.1 for we were in version 4.2. I'm going to provide a little bit of a quick start also for MySQL. So I worked with MySQL many years ago, but I'm going to provide a little bit of quick start for those of you that are not familiar with it and how you can get up and running with it pretty quickly. But the main thing I'm going to cover in this talk is really more behind the scenes of why this is the fastest version of nopCommerce ever. So I saw this statement kind of big and bold in many ways around this release. And when you first download and run the app, even locally, it does feel snappier. It does feel faster. And I'm sure when it's out in the wild, it should prove itself as well. But just looking at it from a code perspective, I believe you'll also see why this architecture has improved performance just by seeing how certain things were refactored. So the biggest feature release, I would say, for 4.3 is performance. So the release notes, I actually create a little kind of shortcut domain of nopreleasenotes.com that'll take you to the release notes. And there's quite a bit to look at. There's 4 highlight features that we're going to be kind of diving into. But along with that, there were 74 improvements that are worth taking a look at and 43 refactorings, as well as 58 bug fixes. I'm going to mention a couple of those at the end of this presentation, but nonetheless, there is a lot more that I will not be covering in this presentation due to time, but they are worth checking out within those release notes. All right, so what we're going to do is just kind of pop through some of these highlight features. We're going to touch on Facebook Pixel, look at Dotnet Core 3.1 a little bit, and we're going to spend probably more of the time on the significant performance enhancements. And at first, I didn't even have the word significant in here, even though that was in the release notes. After going through the code, I put it right back in the presentation of the word significant because there are some significant refactorings, some subtle, but nonetheless a lot of gain, that it's worth having the word significant around performance improvements. Again, we'll touch on MySQL and have a little quick start there, and I'll also cover some of the database changes. So for Facebook Pixel, for those of you that are familiar with Facebook Pixel, you probably know a lot about it. I don't even have a Facebook account, so I can't really demonstrate this piece. But when it comes to having tracking within Facebook ads and having that integration within nopCommerce itself, I'll go ahead and share that, that integration once, because the plugin does come with the solution out of the box. Once you have your Pixel ID, once you register for that within Facebook, you can then enable various aspects that you want to track, such as page views, add to cart, to where you get that, those benefits of tracking, working with the tracking ID within Facebook to have some targeted ads. All right. I'm a developer, so yes, I will talk probably more about developer stuff when it comes to upgrading to .NET 3.1. So we're actually moving from .NET Core 2.2 to 3.1 when it comes to moving from 4.2 to 4.3. So, nopCommerce itself just continues to evolve. And when we kind of look back a little bit, we see that version 3.9 and going to 4.0, we were preparing for .NET Core, but we were still targeting the .NET framework, to where we were targeting 4.6.1. From there, moving from 4.1 or 4.0 to 4.1, that's when the nopCommerce team started to target .NET Core version 2.1. And then moving from version 4.1 to 4.2 of nopCommerce, that's when our nopCommerce team has enabled Linux and Docker support and targeted the 2.2 version of .NET Core. So for version 4.3 of nopCommerce, we're targeting .NET Core 3.1, which is a really good release to target. You'll see on the next slide here shortly. So for what's coming, it looks like it will be a version 4.4, not a 5.0. I recommend actually looking at the GitHub issues to kind of really get a sense of what is coming and to kind of have a little bit of a preview of that. So when you go to issues, you can do a little search. Actually, by default, it'll show you all the open issues. You can then select milestones, in which at the time when I took the screenshot, I know things have changed already. This was a couple of weeks ago, I believe I took the screenshot. For what were tagged as 4.4 have been kind of moved around. But nonetheless, if you want to see what's currently being targeted for 4.4, it's good to kind of filter it down by selecting that milestone. So for example, at the time, you had the version of the shell around the admin getting upgraded. You also had MongoDB support being targeted for the next release, and also full web farm support for what that might entail. So if you really truly want to track what's going on with nopCommerce, I highly recommend going out to the issues and kind of filtering by the milestone to get a sense of what's coming. So when it comes to the different releases of .NET Core, the 4.2 release of nopCommerce is based on 2.2. And for what's highlighted here, you'll notice that it's from a Microsoft support perspective, .NET Core 2.2 is actually already at end of life. So one good reason to upgrade to 4.3 is that you'll have a .NET Core 3.1 under the covers, to where that has the long-term support. And long-term in Microsoft's, what do you call it? Just their standard now for what is long-term support is only 3 years. But nonetheless, we're still 3 years out for how long the .NET Core 3.1 is supported. Now, the reason I think that the next version of nopCommerce might stay with 3.1 is because .NET 5.0 is to get released at the end of this year. However, .NET 5.0 is not going to be a long-term support release. So it might be, I'm guessing, Andre, maybe it's a good question for later. Does it make sense to move on to the next version of .NET Framework once 6.0 is released versus 5.0? Because 5.0 will have a short lifetime. All right, let's move on. So some of the benefits of upgrading to 3.1, there's a lot of behind the scenes pieces. When it comes to, there's some C# 8.0 capabilities that could start getting incorporated. You got .NET Standard 2.1. Async streams could even start getting incorporated. There's now a built-in JSON parser or library in general. There's also Blazor support that might, who knows, that could be something that might eventually get integrated in some fashion. But the .NET framework itself continues to evolve in a great way, in many ways, just like nopCommerce does. And I'm glad to be a .NET developer and nopCommerce developer nowadays. Things are looking really great. All right, so let's kind of jump into some of these significant performance enhancements. Now, these came right from the release notes of there was a revised caching system. You'll see some of those details. And also, we have moved away from using Entity Framework, which this was a little bit of an eye-opener for me. I was kind of surprised to see this, but you're going to see more in the code of what really has changed in those regards. And yeah, it really kind of proves out to be the fastest version of nopCommerce. So I'm comparing the solutions. I'm not expecting to be able to read all these different projects here within the slide deck here, but nonetheless, we're going to be walking through the code at a level of, first at a higher level of the different NuGet packages. What are some of these libraries now at a code level that we're now unreferencing or referencing new? Then we'll look at the nop core library a little closer, see what's changed there. Then we'll walk through nop.data. Then we'll look at nop.services in that library. And then we'll touch on some things because not a lot has changed in nop web, but I will highlight a few things that are in that library that have changed. We'll also look at a sample plugin that kind of highlights all these different changes that have taken place in the core code base that is kind of reflected in one of these plugins. We'll look at that a little closer. So for the different NuGet packages, I basically went to each solution and compared them. Within version 4.2, we were referencing the very popular Newtonsoft JSON. Now we're using the internal library within the .NET Framework 3.1. You'll see a lot of changes just mainly because of targeting .NET 3.1 versus .NET 2.2. So there's a good handful of just changes at a library level, and for what's noted on this slide here, just because we targeted the 3.1 framework. Also, in comparing 4.2 to 4.3, when it comes to the NuGet packages, you have the easy caching memory library that's no longer being used because they're now using the built-in library within .NET 3.1. The SMT client is obsolete now within .NET Framework, so it looks like it was recommended to use MailKit in replace of that particular library. Fluid assertions, that was added really for unit testing. I haven't really dug into that much, but that's a library that's now available for that area of the code. And also the authentication for Facebook was added as well. So at a package level, here's where really the bigger changes are. Entity framework itself, and when it comes to for the different libraries that we reference at a NuGet level, are simply no longer there. We're now using LinqToDB. We're going to look at some of that, and the Fluent Migrator to kind of take over some of the migration capabilities that came with Entity Framework. So we're really using these two separate libraries in replace of Entity Framework. And also, again, going down this path, it made it easier to actually move forward in supporting other database formats such as MySQL. So in past presentations, I've shared this slide a lot, way too many times. If you actually want to get a walkthrough of the architecture, if you go to nopjohn.com, it'll take you to that YouTube recording. It's been given a lot, but I kind of want to use this as we walk through the code itself. Actually, that presentation is quickly becoming out of date. I will need to update that, especially with these entity framework changes. So yes, there will need to be a new version of that architecture walkthrough. So let's start off with the nop core and look at domains. So I did what any good developer would do, and that's have the old version and compare it to the new version. Just did like a code compare. So in kind of understanding what these code compares look like, anything that's in a light blue is something that has changed. Anything that's in a pink area, that has been removed, and something that's green has been added to version 4.3. This is just a little example within the nop.core.caching namespace. Some of the core classes that make up the caching, what has changed there. More importantly, let's look at the domain classes. So just at a glance here, we see a lot of blue. We see a lot of changes that have taken place across the domains. Most of those changes, if we look at, let's say, the product domain class, you're going to see code getting removed. You're going to see what are called these different navigation properties that have gotten removed. And that was for how these different domain objects were kind of hydrated when using Entity Framework. Now, this could have been carried forward with other data access means, but nonetheless, it probably made sense to make the different domain classes leaner. So when it comes to getting more performance and even probably better integration of caching, if you're working with what are called POCOs, plain old C# objects, you probably have a better way to kind of structure your caching and get more performance. So the majority of the changes you'll see look like this, of code getting removed, and really that code is these different navigation properties.
I haven't asked more about the properties.
So we have the nop.core.classes that actually been moved into nop.data for the most part. So iRepository for data access is just moved into the nop.data library. And you'll see some of that a little later. All right, so moving on from nop core, let's check out nop data and see what's changed there. So in comparing for how mapping was done against the domains versus how it's done now, it's still a mapping type aspect, but now they're called builders. So what were mappers are now builders. And the builders are actually in the same namespace as mapping. So when you first do a code comparison, it looks like a lot of code was removed and then added, but I would say it's been more so moved, renamed, and modified. So for the most part, it's not a deletion of those. It's kind of a refactoring of those and a moving around of those classes. So let's look at an example of that. So here, we have the affiliate map. I just kind of picked the first one on the list, and we have the affiliate builder. So the class itself, the class definition, still inherits from a certain base class that kind of handles a lot of the plumbing. But nonetheless, when it comes to describing your domain, you're describing the mappings around your domain, it is a different syntax. So before, we had I guess you'd say the entity framework builder way, and now we have the Fluent Migrator builder way. So address itself was a navigation property that no longer exists, but you'll also notice on the right-hand side that the address property is recognized as being a foreign key within the builder. It's just that we don't have this, I don't say limitation, but this hard-coded navigation property in order to populate. And again, this is what Entity Framework was doing, or what we are, making the best out of Entity Framework, and now we're using the Fluent Migrator to replace the builder pattern, or the mapping pattern. Some other features when it comes to migrations itself, if we look at this folder indexes, so this is new to where when it comes to preparing how indexes get carried forward on installation, we have these new classes that kind of describe on how creating that index. And so the Fluent migration handles this aspect of that syntax of create index and I'm sure many other objects that you would have in your database. Now, why this is important is because if we're going to support other types of database stores along with SQL Server, having this way of doing a Fluent syntax that can be kind of applied to not only SQL Server but MySQL and other future database stores, this is actually a pretty good way to go. You'll also find that the server.indexes.sql no longer exists. It's actually in the nop.web project. So kind of hard coding the different SQL scripts when it comes to I wouldn't say an upgrade, but an installation and even some upgrade aspects. It's a lot of that's moved into the library itself in this Fluent syntax. So, and looking at nop data, it's just to reinforce, Entity Framework is gone. The classes are, when it comes to EF repository, those are gone. LinqToDB, I've seen it link #2DB. I've seen it LinqToDB. If you Google it, you'll probably find links or results for both. But nonetheless, LinqToDB can support many database types, just like Entity Framework in many ways. But it looks like it's a lot cleaner for even the kinds of the queries that would actually execute against your database store. And again, the Fluent Migrator can also support many database types, and has a really clean approach for like we saw previously on describing like creating an index and so on. So in many ways, this direction is providing I can see where it's providing significant performance and just simply more flexibility overall in moving forward and have a wider audience for nopCommerce itself. So LinqToDB, I think that what they describe at the top of their site where you can kind of get more information, I think, when I read this, it kind of stood out this is why nopCommerce chose it. So for being like a light and simple, fast layer between your POCO objects and your database, I'm sure there's some aspects there that you could do a deep dive on. But here the second question of, it's one step above other ORMs like Dapper, Massive, and Petapoco. Now, I know like Dapper was heavily touted within the nopCommerce community to switch to that. But LinqToDB basically allows you to kind of keep using this link syntax, but you're not working with what they call these different magic strings that maybe are hard to predict what's going to happen. And also, I think the bigger gain was, there's a lot of code that did not have to change. And we'll see an example of that here shortly in switching from entity framework to LinqToDB. And I'm sure if you actually looked at the queries, this might be, again, a good question for Andrei a little later. When it comes to the queries that entity framework would execute against your database, that query can sometimes look really ugly and non-performant. So I'm assuming there might be some other advantages in how the actual query gets created and executed on the database of why that might have been a good reason to go to LinqToDB. There's no change tracking, things like that. So there are some features that are taken away out of this, but really they're not features that we were using within nopCommerce anyway, for the most part. All right, so there is, like I said, there is some more information out there. So when it comes to, there's a video out there I thought it was pretty good when it comes to just getting a more of a elementary understanding of LinqToDB. So both LinqToDB and Fluent Migrator, there's definitely more information out there that you can find and get a better understanding of how those libraries work. All right, moving on from nop data, let's move on to nop services and check that out. So in looking at nop services, when I did this first glance, I see that there are some changes within the service class themselves. We're going to look at the affiliate service here shortly. We also have this namespace and a lot of new objects getting added of the type of cache event customer. So as an example, the affiliate cache event customer inherits this new base class of a cache event customer of type affiliate. And when it comes to, that particular aspect of caching, the event publisher and how it works with caching of data for the customer, this is actually probably a deeper talk in itself. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here, but it's good to be aware of that. There's a lot of cache event customer objects that were created to support the overall caching strategy. So here's a class I think that kind of jumps out for me on what has changed and what really hasn't changed that you might have expected to change. So for example, when we look at this query, get affiliate by friendly name URL, the query itself at the code level has not changed. So the nopCommerce architecture was already designed to where it did more of a link to objects type query and then would get projected to the entity framework ORM. So that syntax of entity framework, you really don't see within the services layer. So it was kind of nice to see that very little had to change here when it comes to how you would execute a query and moving to a different ORM like LinqToDB. I thought that was pretty cool. When it comes to the caching side, you had this to-cached. It's actually an extension method. We're going to look at it here shortly, but you have this to-cached get by ID. So you'll find within the different services, it was strategically added to where, for example, it would actually go to the cache first before trying to actually get the data from the database. So an example of that. So the method, again, it's an extension method off the iRepository. And if it can't find it in the cache, basically, then it will just go ahead and get that ID through the database call. So more strategic caching has been put in place throughout the services. And when you look at this cache event customer, this new base class, it basically kind of provides a cleaner way of consolidating how we work with the cache service when it comes to this level of caching from the event publisher. Again, that's something a lot more detail I want to get into, but I think you can see it best on how the refactoring has taken place. When you look at something like within the category or the catalog namespace. So where we had just this one cache event customer class kind of probably doing more than it needed to do, it's now broken out across more like almost think of per domain for how we're structuring that caching, this type of caching. So the main takeaway of this is that the caching system simply has been restructured. It's been better organized, and then it's been strategically kind of placed throughout the different services, like where we saw with that extension method of when to hit the cache or when to hit the database. And again, that cache could be the in-memory cache by default, or could be something like Redis. All right, moving on from nop services, let's go ahead and look at nop web a little bit closer. So not a lot of changes here. There's been changes in regards to maybe injecting more of the cache service, or because we're, because within the libraries themselves, we're, using some different namespaces. So that's where you'll find most of the changes. So one thing I want to point out, just because this is where the code is that a lot of the installation scripts have been moved into the libraries themselves, like we saw with the Fluent Migrator. So there's a less here. You see we still script out the store procedures for both for SQL Server and MySQL, but nonetheless, things are really getting cleaned up here to where database updates are handled through full migration. So again, yeah, there was really minor changes across the models, views, and controllers. It's definitely worth taking a look at, but for the most part, I didn't see any major logic changes or a major refactoring per se, like we saw in the other libraries. One thing to point out is that the plugins JSON file I noticed changed to where we had the installed plugins name section that is now being deprecated, or it's obsolete. And we now have a newer section that also allows you, I'm assuming this is the minimum version of a plugin that you're expecting to get installed for nopCommerce. So yeah, I haven't really looked into much more detail what the version really implies, but notice that that metadata is being stored here now. All right, so at a plugin level, the QualPay and Square plugins have been removed in the 4.3 release, and the PayPal Smart Payment Buttons plugin was added, as well as, of course, Facebook Pixel that we touched on earlier. The one plugin I want to kind of look at a little bit closer is one that kind of has a little bit of everything inside of it. It's not that it's a great plugin; it just has model views, controllers, some service layer type objects, and data access, migration, and that is this shipped fixed by weight or fixed by weight by total. So let's look at that. Not going to really dig into the code level so much, but just to kind of highlight that comes the implementation of the new domain pattern. It might be a good example of that. When it comes to the builder, instead of using the mapper, this is a good example of that, as well as the migrations and how that's implemented within the plugin. So a plugin is kind of almost like a microcosm of the whole nopCommerce architecture itself. And this plugin kind of shows that. And when it comes to the new caching pattern, you can kind of see that in both ways when it comes to the cache event by customer, and as well as just within the service itself on going to cache. So yeah, this is really a great summary of, at a plugin level, of the performance enhancements that have taken place. All right. Paul, is there anything I need to address on that one? Or should I go ahead and keep going?
Nope, I say you just keep on moving.
Sounds good. All right, MySQL. Now, I worked with MySQL many, many years ago. So I thought, when I had to go through installing it, I thought I'd go ahead and share a little quick start to kind of share my experiences on this. So the first question is, why MySQL? And for one, I totally understand why there needs to be another alternative to SQL Server, a free alternative in particular. And MySQL itself, I think it's a great place to start, just because, for one, it's been the #1 open source DB since 2008. It's used by WordPress, so people getting comfortable that are comfortable with WordPress at a data level, it's great translation there, and just many other open source platforms use it. So MySQL versus maybe even Postgres, I thought MySQL is a really good place to start. So the installation was actually crazy easy, I thought. I'll share some of the surprises I had, but nonetheless, if you're going to install MySQL, I recommend just simply using the installer for Windows. If you have to use the individual installers, you can do that as well, but this made life easy. When you kick off that install, I just went with the developer default. I recommend doing the same. And then I'll show you all the different other applications that it'll install, such as the Workbench, which you'll be using a lot when it comes to MySQL. Also some Visual Studio integration. And standalone, that's how I did it. Went through with the defaults in that. And being a development computer, went with that default and left the ports the same as well. I was okay with that. Well, again, the default and the strong password. And when it comes to adding the users, this is where I wasn't exactly sure, what level of permissions is nopCommerce going to need when it comes to doing this install of the MySQL database for the first time. So to play it safe, actually, there were 3 different roles that I went ahead and created logins for. DB admin, matter of fact, I'll kind of continue the next transition here. DB admin, DB manager, and DB designer. I wanted to just kind of create all 3 of those just in case I had any problems on moving forward with the installation of the nopCommerce database. And I left with the default, the service name, and then it prompted me, it's about to do all this. And then after that is complete, I highly recommend then going to the MySQL Workbench, opening that up and verify that those accounts got created, because that particular installation actually did kind of error out on me midway through the MySQL installer, but it did complete everything as expected. So you might have that same kind of error that might take place on your system at the end of the installation. But again, just go to MySQL Workbench to see if things really got carried forward. Now, from my experience on installing nopCommerce through MySQL, I ended up having to use the admin role. I'm not sure exactly why. We can touch on this maybe later on the questions. I first tried, I believe, the DB manager role. Yes, even shows the error on the screen here. And I had trouble. So, and going back through the installation, put in DB admin, and I was able to have the installation of MySQL work well. And of course, I was just trying to get through the installation, and there might be some special accounts you might want to have. And again, MySQL itself, I don't work with all the time. There might be a better way on how you want to manage your accounts. So once this was done, I opened up the MySQL Workbench, saw all the different database objects. Those of you that use SQL Server Studio will be right at home inside of Workbench. There's even some other features in there I think that are a little nicer than Studio, I discovered. But yeah, when it comes to just working with the database, MySQL has advanced a lot from when I worked with it many, many years ago. So considering this to be even though I am extremely comfortable with SQL Server, I got pretty comfortable pretty quickly, quicker than expected with MySQL. So when it comes to having that choice for clients of SQL Server or MySQL, I think you might find the same, that you might get to a pretty fast comfort level with MySQL if you've been so comfortable with SQL Server all these years. There's some good comparisons out there. At a high level, you can kind of see MySQL versus SQL Server. That's worth checking out. I came across this one. I thought this one was helpful to where when you're doing a query, how you're concatenating data on the query. And when it comes to getting a new GUID or a new ID, unique identifier, as well as like little things like getting the current date. There's those slight changes that are going to be different. So we're close to wrapping this up. We're going to look at some database changes, and then we're going to move into our Q&A. So going through database changes, I utilized the SQL Server database projects to get a better sense of what really has changed. I also had to look at the upgrade SQL script and even share a little bit more of how the Fluent Migrator works at a data level on tracking migrations. So this is not something you have to do. I just found it to be useful in comparing database scripts. I created a SQL Server database project and imported all the scripts into a project within Visual Studio. And from there, you can actually compare scripts. You can even compare database to database, but I compared the 4.3 scripts to the 4.2 database. And one thing that kind of stood out for me pretty quickly is there's a lot of just changes at a database level, which I was kind of surprised to see. When it comes to there's almost all the tables were listed, and digging into a little bit further, I noticed that we even see in this example, probably because of how the Fluent Migrator kind of handled this or how the domain object is structured, there was some column reordering, which was highlighted change, and also the constraint name itself was changed, which would again just highlight a change on the table. So little things like that might throw off your comparisons if you're trying to see what has changed at a database level. But for what has truly changed outside of some new column adds that I will show, for what's been deleted, you just had a couple stored procs that were removed, and there was the Facebook pixel configuration table that's for the plugin, and there's also this migration version info table that's used for the Fluent migration library. We'll look at a little bit of that code. So in order to get a really good understanding of what has changed at a database level and to kind of pop through some of those changes, I did have to open up the upgrade SQL script, and I searched for alter table throughout the script to see, where that have been changes at a schema level. So once I kind of identified those different tables, I thought I'd go ahead and share them with you this way. That way you can kind of see, if you look at the top, we see that we have these 3 new columns getting added to the stored pickup point table of latitude, longitude, and transient days. The order table has a new column added to it as the redeem rewards points entry ID. Discount table had a column added to it, which is the admin comment. The rewards point history table had a column added to it, used with orders, so it's the order GUID, I believe, that it references. Yeah, generic attribute table had a date time column getting added to it. And shipping by weight with the plugin, that had the transient days column added to it. So those are all the different database changes at a column level what got added. So don't be too confused by the renaming of things when it comes to comparing what has changed. The migration version info table, this is where the table is getting initially created within the update SQL script. And you also noted it gets seeded with data to kind of get it up to par with migrations that are already in the library itself. So instead of just creating the table itself, there was some data defaulted with inside of there to kind of bring it up to speed on where the migrations library is at. So a lot of these IDs tie back to the migration code within the libraries. So one last touch on the Fluent Migrator. It does support many different formats, which is kind of nice to see, and it does it in a very clean way. And that's a library, again, I think it's worth even kind of checking out a little bit more. All right, so to kind of wrap this up, we covered the different highlight features, but when it comes to the different improvements, there were a couple that stood out I thought that were worth sharing. I was actually going to try to tackle all these different aspects, but it was getting a little crazy. So for example, within improvements, NOP has upgraded to reCAPTCHA version 3. So that's kind of significant. And there's also little things like, you can now include the customer avatar and product reviews. That's a nice new feature. When it comes to refactorings, there's more hard-coded locales kind of removed and replaced with a translation. We also had there was a work item noting that the SMTP client was been removed in place of a different library mail kit. Some bug fixes. There was an infinite loop in the stored procedure for doing full text search that was fixed, as well as when it comes to not being able to update the tier price, that is also fixed as well. So for what the different improvements and refactorings and bug fixes, each one of these might have a different meaning for your organization. I just highly recommend checking out the release notes. There's a lot there outside of just the highlight features that are worth digging through. So yeah, I can totally see why this is being touted as the fastest version of nopCommerce. I think there are some great changes that were put in place here. And I highly recommend downloading it, getting familiar with it, and kind of first witnessing the snappiness of the solution when you first run it, and kind of digging into code even more. So to kind of wrap this up, I think it's good to mention that the documentation now is in GitHub. I know this has been mentioned overall a while ago, but when it comes to updating the documentation, for it being in GitHub, and now for how you can easily just click on the improve this doc, what that'll do, not only will allow you to edit it, but it'll also fork that library, and not, you don't have to worry about it changing it without having a second set of eyes look at it. Basically, you would just do a pull request to the nopCommerce team, and then they would incorporate it into the overall documentation, almost like working with code. So it is pretty easy to update documentation if you see any errors. All right, so in summary, I created some of these domains to kind of redirect you to different things. So check out the release notes, NOP forums, that will redirect you to the forums within NOP. All these different things can be found on the nopCommerce site. Documentation, I highly recommend checking that out. I have seen a lot of check-ins going into the documentation. So for the 4th year release, I can see that the team is doing their best to kind of have the documentation updated for the 4th year release. For YouTube, you got the nopCommerce channel. You can go to nopTube. That'll redirect you to there. And more importantly, this being new, this is the first, again, nopCommerce meetup. Meetup will take you to the meetup.com site, and so you can easily get to that. And again, it's the 3rd Tuesday of the month. Email me if you want a copy of this presentation. I'll gladly give you a copy of the slides. If you want to present at a meetup, sponsor a meetup, if you need some training, consulting, in general, questions, feedback, just send me an email, and we'll go from there. So I think we're time for Q&A. How are we doing on time? We're doing great, I think. Actually, we're a little ahead of the time. We'll still stop this at noon, so we might have a little more time than expected on the Q&A. So I'm going to enable this. I think I will go ahead and share the spreadsheet because there's so many questions here. I know it helps a lot of people to be able to read the question. I'm going to zoom in on this. So Andrei, I think what I'm going to do is kind of ask you the question. Get my screen over here. I'll go and ask you different questions, and then, or if there's one that you want to kind of jump on early, I'm going to zoom in on this. And we talked about this one actually earlier. Of course, it was a selfish question of, do you see Blazor being part of nopCommerce? Go ahead and share some of your opinions on that you shared with me earlier.
Hi guys, hi everyone. First of all, I would like to say thank you for joining us today. I would like to say thanks to John for this really great speech about nopCommerce 4.3. I think, usually on our conferences, I talk about during my speech about what has been done in the previous, what is our roadmap and so on. I think we should invite John for our next conferences, for keynote speeches, to talk about previous versions.
There you go.
He has done it really good. So back to the question about Blazor, right?
Yep.
We always try to follow all the latest technologies, what Microsoft promotes and so on, like Entity Framework before 4.3, the latest version of .Dotnet Core. But this new technology, I think it's not mature enough because, it should become really popular among developers. Everyone should start using it. And I'm not sure that it will really become popular. If it becomes popular in the future, we will start using it. But I think we should wait a little bit.
Makes sense. Now you actually go ahead and you put some questions in there. I think they'd be good to address those kind of early because it sounds like there's some good things to know about, and I'll maybe bounce up to one of these other ones. But I thought it'd be good to go ahead and address like how do you plan for the roadmap for 4.4 and if you want to answer some of your own questions, that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important questions because people always ask about what are you going to implement in the next version? How do you plan your roadmap? We should know what you are going to implement so we don't implement it ourselves. So if we are talking about the next version of nopCommerce, our team decided to focus on several points. There are many questions in this Excel file, like, are you going to implement some work item? Are you going to implement this or that? What I can say that we are not going to implement some specific work items, most probably, not really demanded. What we are going to do, if we are talking about features, to implement only the most popular and really demanded features that should exist almost in each store and so on. So it's like, we are not going to spend a lot of time on multi-vendor support. It's quite specific feature. I think 99% of stores don't need it. Or, for example, what we are going to focus is on creation of framework. So we would like to make nopCommerce really easy for customization, for third-party developers, for plugin vendors, this way. And what we are also going to do is to focus on performance. We did a lot of job in this current version by moving away from entity framework. In the next version, we are going to focus on asynchronous operations, on better scalability support, on web farms, on Redis support, on faster Redis support, I mean. Mm-hmm. So it will be our focus. And of course, to make nopCommerce more pluggable.
Good.
This way. We have really enterprise and highlight features planned for the next version, but these features are really popular. Actually, you already can check our roadmap on GitHub. We have finished choosing work items for the next version yesterday. So you can actually go to GitHub right now and check it.
Nice. Okay. So what about your next question you have for yourself, the next conference?
The next conference. Actually, of course, everyone knows about this COVID stuff. So it's absolutely not possible to hold the real conference this year. But previously we held conferences, and each conference has its own website. Days 19.nopcommerce.com, days 18.nopcommerce.com. Actually, if you go to days 20.nopcommerce.com, you can see the website has been launched maybe 3 months ago. Actually, we have already chosen the city, the country. We found a venue, but when this COVID stuff started growing up, we decided to wait. So now, most probably, 100% will skip this year. And I think people could ask about what about online conferences? I think online conferences are great, but it depends on community of a specific product. I think if we are talking about nopCommerce, we should not hold online conferences, because during our conferences we have a lot of networking. People talk, meet, discuss some partnership, finding clients. It would be not possible when you're holding some conference online. So what we have to do is just to wait until this COVID stuff ends.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully this meetup will fill in the gap for some and keep the community active. Let's see. Tell you what, let's see. You want to show the office of the nopCommerce team? Do you want to take some more questions and kind of get back to that one at the end? When it comes to showing the office?
Oh, what? Could you please repeat?
You have one more question for yourself, that you have when it comes to showing the office of the nopCommerce team. Why don't we do that one at the end, and we'll take some other questions from others on the list.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great to see. So kind of going back up here at the top, I know there's some pretty big questions in this one from Mohammed, and some specific ones too. I don't know if you want to address any of those in a high level fashion, like for example, when it comes to converting into Linux and MySQL. Have you noticed any certain cons? And also, is there anything at a high level when it comes to AWS and Azure? So I can see these different kinds of questions of when it comes to applying, some of these newer to nopCommerce technologies. What are some of your overall opinions about kind of diving into, let's say, MySQL and Linux and hosting in these different cloud platforms?
What I'm thinking about is that people should always have some choice. Right now, you can choose between Windows or Linux, between some different databases. Furthermore, in the next version, we are also going to introduce nopSQL database, MongoDB support. So I think there are so many articles over the internet. What should you choose, Linux or Windows? If we start discussing it right now, I think it will take maybe 1 hour to discuss what is better for Linux. What should I use? It depends on you. If you want to save some money, maybe you should go with Linux. If you like Windows, I don't know, for some reasons, if you are used to Windows, you can use it. It's all up to you, to people.
Yep. And this would be a great talk topic for someone in the future if they want to give this talk. I would love to hear more of the experiences out there of applying some of these newer features. You want to go ahead and move on to the next one? Let's see. I answered that one when it comes to Entity Framework. Is there any more you want to say about that move away from Entity Framework, or do you think that's kind of covered? Was it, like, when it comes to LinqToDB, did that, at a code level, I can see why that kind of stood out, but is there anything that I might have missed when it comes to LinqToDB on why that stood out for you to choose that library?
Actually, I think you have already answered my question during your speech.
Okay.
Yeah, and all the most important information could be found on LinqToDB official website. You have displayed a screenshot from this website. It's type safe. It allows to have caching of entities between HTTP requests. So these two reasons are the most important ones. That's why we decided to go with this technology.
That makes sense. Thanks for the added part there. Let's go on. How about this one?
Excuse me for interrupting. Yeah, there are many questions.
Yeah, there are. So we don't have to go into a lot of detail in a lot of them. Feel free to, if they really are too detailed, we can move on.
Yeah, what I would like to ask you, I can answer any of these questions. Not a problem. But considering that we're a little bit limited of time, I would suggest to ask not specific technical questions like how to implement something and so on. We can also answer these questions on our forum. So maybe at the end of this, if you have some time.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put over here in the comment forum, meaning that this is a great question that should be for the community. So whether Mohammed adds this to the forum, I might even add it to the forum for Mohammed. But nonetheless, if there's some really in the weeds kind of questions that you want to move past, I'm just going to make a note and put forum, and we'll go from there.
You can see the comment column, this V letter. Those are the questions I really would like to answer.
Sure. You want to touch on this one? Because I feel like this one's answered right. When it comes to nopCommerce to support progressive web apps. maybe at a high level?
I think this work item, it's really, it could be really quite complex to implement. It will be really time consuming, but we still have this work item on our GitHub roadmap, but it's not assigned for the next version of nopCommerce. So maybe later, most probably later.
Makes sense. All right, let's move on. How about this one? How can I learn nopCommerce as a new to amazing open source nopCommerce? So basically, how do you recommend, Andrei, when it comes to diving into nopCommerce, and where's some great reference material? What do you suggest?
So there are maybe 2-3 ways. I think the best ways to go with. So the first one, for example, if you are limited in time, of course, it's always better to find someone who can teach you, who can help you. For example, contact some of our solution partners, or maybe, or contact John, for some training services. But if, for example, you don't have money, the best way to learn something, it's not just about nopCommerce. It can be told about anything. You just have to start doing something. You have to find some job where you have to customize some nopCommerce website and just start doing something. Implement some plugins, implement some website. I think for a beginner, it could take maybe about a couple of weeks to learn nopCommerce. Of course, you won't be a real professional. You won't know anything in nopCommerce. But if you are doing it every day, I think it's one of the best ways to learn something new. Just do something. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, something like if you don't know something, you can always ask on our forums or maybe read documentation. It depends on what way you prefer yourself. When someone else teaches you, or do you like to do something and learn something? It depends.
Yeah, really just to kind of add to that and wrap this question up is the documentation is really good and it keeps getting updated. There's actually a lot there. There is a lot out on YouTube as well you could check out. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the weeds about some crazy thing that maybe you're applying that .NET or C# really allows. So I found even just having like a Pluralsight subscription or something like that is really helpful to understand the architecture for what you're looking at. All right, let's look at the next one.
Hey, John, just as a tie-in, there was
Oh yeah, Paul, you know how to respond to this one. You just started working with Nop as a developer.
But before we jump there, somebody had asked, and this kind of ties into what you were just talking about, on where the best place to go for some of this information is, and whether or not the nopCommerce team is still like heavily utilizing the forums, or if they're more migrating towards GitHub, and where people would best look for that kind of information.
So would you say when it comes to just general questions about nopCommerce, would you still go to forums, or would you actually also do something within GitHub, such as within the issues or something like that? So how do you separate forums and issues on understanding nopCommerce?
Actually, honestly saying, I didn't hear Paul well. Could you please repeat the question one more time?
Yep. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so there was a question that was, does the Nop team still read and answer and interact on the forums, or are you primarily using GitHub, and what would be the best place for end users and developers to find information and interact with the Nop team?
Excuse me, guys. My little daughter is here, and she's asking me to go home. Not a problem.
Andre, I have to tell you, she has stolen the show.
Yeah. Okay, done. So I think I should say that our team reads forums each day. I personally read absolutely all messages, all questions, but we don't answer general technical questions. We are just we read forums just to find some new suggestions, bug reports, and so on. Because there are so many people now on our forums who can help from our community who can help other people. So we use forums. Our team uses forum only for new suggestions and bug reports. And of course, we also use GitHub. So it's up to you. If you would like to report some bug using forums, you can do it. Or if you would like to use GitHub, you can also suggest something or report a bug on GitHub. But of course, you should not use GitHub to ask some technical questions.
Cool. It's good that you're still looking at forums pretty heavily. Let's see. Oh, I noticed this myself. When it comes to several commits within, after 4.3 was released, there were some other new commits within 4.3 that I haven't even seen myself on previous versions. Is there going to be a rebuild? And is it, matter of fact, is for what you can download, is it the latest and greatest that is committed into the 4.3 branch?
Yes. There were maybe 4 or 5 commits to version 4.3 after it has been released. We know about that. And there was a suggestion on our forums, very good suggestion, because we cannot release right now, cannot release a new version because for example 4.4 or 4.3.1, because in this case all third-party plugins will be marked as incompatible. So what we have to do, most probably in the next version of nopCommerce, there was a suggestion, we will make some kind of major and minor versions. So for example, if we release 4.40 and some people find some bug, we could release 4.40.1 or maybe later 0.2 or 0.3, and all these versions actually will be considered as 4.40. So all plugins will continue working and so on. We cannot do it in this version 4.30, but most probably we will handle these situations in the next version of nopCommerce, so it doesn't happen anymore.
Can understand that. That was a great question, Joseph, because I experienced that myself and I kind of forgot about it. Actually, I want to jump back up to one of Cody's questions. Did you expect NOP to be as popular when you first started? Did you expect it to kind of grow like it has when you first put it out there?
No, actually, I expect it to be much more popular.
I like that.
So
well,
we still have work to do.
Yes, I think you're making some good decisions. All right. Let's see. That's kind of so NoSQL support expected anytime soon. So I did see where it was initially marked for 4.4 release to have MongoDB support. Go ahead and answer this however you like.
Yes. Most probably we will support, not most probably, 100% we will support MongoDB in the next version of nopCommerce. And right now, it won't take much time to support it. The only problem will be our storage procedures, but I think we can handle it.
Wow. So you're talking about the entire database would be entirely in MongoDB. Interesting.
Yep.
Very interesting. All right. Let's see. Are there plans to separate the UI with UI frameworks? Like, oh, I kind of touched on this a little bit, like Blazor, a microservice layer. So having a multi-layer architecture, not really a microservice architecture in itself, but do you see any possible separations instead of maybe having just the one site? Do you see anything like that possibly in the future for nopCommerce, or a need for that?
There are still a lot of things to discuss about that. Maybe yes, not in the next version, but maybe later.
Okay. Let's see. Thanks, Jose. Let's see. Is nopCommerce planning a mobile PP version anytime soon? Customer admin part.
Mobile PP. What is it? PP?
I don't know what that is either.
Application, maybe.
So when it comes to a mobile app, I mean, I know there's other ones out on the market, but do you pretty much just see nopCommerce still just offering the website itself when it comes to other UIs, like a mobile UI that's maybe done in Xamarin? Would you kind of still leave that to vendors that you see, kind of just having those other types of UIs? I even know there's even another vendor out there that has a desktop client for the admin. Do you see nopCommerce kind of staying focused on the website itself and not going into these other types of ways to have user interfaces?
We still have a work item for mobile application.
Yeah.
And we are still thinking about whether nopCommerce team should implement it, because, we already have several third-party mobile applications on our marketplace. So what our team think about is that we should also allow plugin vendors to implement new features, to sell new plugins. So our community of plugin vendors also should grow up. So not in the near time, but this work item is still open. If we implement it, maybe it will be free, but not in the near time.
Okay. So these next couple of questions are kind of in the same realm when it comes to having a NOP API. In other words, where you have these different vendors that, let's say, want to create a mobile front end and whatnot. Do you see nopCommerce itself kind of creating a more rich API that could be, as part of the same web app itself, or maybe a different service stood up? Do you see that aspect being in the future of nopCommerce? Actually,
this question is very similar to the previous one, because there are many third-party web API plugins, and one of the most popular plugins is from noptemplates team. It's really good. So I haven't asked noptemplates team whether they're going to upgrade it or not, but I think they will. I hope so. So if we have this good web API plugin, our team should not implement our plugin ourselves.
Gotcha.
And some good and really trusted vendor has it.
Sounds like more opportunity for vendors to offer more APIs.
I think, for example, people like noptemplates team decides not to support it anymore. And in this case, our team will have to implement it ourselves. We won't have any choice, actually.
Gotcha. All right. So when it comes to I have seen people struggle with this in the past when it comes to, the different payment gateways that are out there and documentation and support and maybe integration, such as with Stripe and PayPal. Do you have any suggestions when it comes to really what they're asking here, when it comes to getting a better understanding of, these different payment gateways? And I don't know if there's like a certain one that you prefer, but nonetheless, I'm assuming you like to you're wanting to support as many of the popular ones. But yeah, what's your opinion on this when it comes to that struggle of deciding what payment gateway to use, and who do you find has maybe some pretty strong integration for those different gateways?
I think I'm not a right person to ask these questions, because actually these questions should be answered by merchants. What is better for them? It depends on country. It depends on some rates, on some other conditions, on some legal things. It depends on many things. Everything except nopCommerce itself.
Yes.
No matter what gateway you decide to use, Stripe or PayPal, you can use any of them in nopCommerce, but you should choose a payment gateway yourself.
I would love to have someone submit a talk on this. So Abdul, if you if you have some good experience to share there, let me know if you want to give a talk on this. I'd love to hear some of your experiences. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Is there a migration path for moving existing sites from SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, to MySQL? That sounds like a tough one to have a migration path, but is there any opinions you have on that?
Yeah, of course it's possible, because actually, database structure is actually the same. You just have to move some data from one database to some other database. There are some kind of, I don't know, plugins on our marketplace to move some data from one database to some other database, but I think it should be done by some kind of database administrators.
Right. Yeah, I did see some aspects within, not necessarily from MySQL Workbench, but when it comes to an import from a different data store, there's definitely tools out there, and you might find something in the MySQL Workbench as well that might get you 80% of the way there, if not all the way there. All right. Any plans to switch back to Entity Framework Core once there's a more mature version? That's a valid question. Is Entity Framework really done and gone in the nopCommerce perspective?
We have been waiting for second layer caching support in Entity Framework, maybe, I don't know, for 7, 8, 9 years. Yeah. So I don't see any progress on this work item. Maybe it will take 2 years for Microsoft to support it. Maybe 3 years, 4. You can ask this question again when Entity Framework supports it.
Makes sense. Let's see. Facing issues hosting nopCommerce site, root folder. Okay, so when it comes to hosting aspects, and oh, I gotcha. When it comes to, instead of well, I'm trying to understand the specific issue, but nonetheless, it sounds like when it comes to having the alternative to having to redirect folders, I don't know. Is there anything that comes to mind on answering this question when it comes to facing these different issues in hosting?
Oh, it's quite specific technical questions.
Yeah,
I think we can. Yeah. There are many other interesting questions, not technical ones.
All right. Any information on? Actually, let's look at the single sign-on available in 4.3. Is there a single sign-on?
No.
Nope. And any news on prices per currency?
GitHub issue number 1. Actually, it's not issue number 1. It's just was one of the first features. It sounds like it's one of the most and highly demanded features. No, it's not. This is what I have been talking about in the beginning. We are not going to implement too specific functionality. I think this functionality, yes, it could be demanded, but it's not really so demanded. And one of the points is that if we decide to implement it, in this case, we will have to change really a lot of source code, a lot of logic, all payment plugin, structure. It will cause too many changes. Our logic, nopCommerce logic, will become really complex for third-party developers. But this functionality is not so demanded, maybe by 4 or 5% of merchants we think so. So we don't close this work item, but we are not going to implement it in the near time. There are so many other really important work items to finish first.
I gotcha. I'm going to bounce back up to this one. It sounds like maybe a similar response, but Simon asked, any information on whether create quote instead of order will be added?
Yes, we have this work item. We'll implement it, but also not in the next version.
Okay. All right, here's a good one. Joseph is asking, who is running the largest site of nopCommerce? Are they using load balancing? Any goodies there? Who do you believe is running the largest site?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, because nopCommerce is open source. Anyone can use it, and no one reports any statistics back to us, Google statistics and so on. I know there are many big websites, but we don't know how many visitors they have, how they were customized, and so on. Honestly saying, I don't know.
So yeah, so it'd be great for the community to kind of share more of their experiences, it sounds like, to share with them.
I know many big websites.
How about this one? Does nopCommerce have the plan to make the application fully async?
In the next version.
Nice. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. That's awesome. Are there any plans to have DTOs on the service layers separate better data objects from the different layers? Currently, there are only models and reviews and entities for the data layer.
No.
So
there is
okay.
no need for that right now. It will make nopCommerce just a little bit more complex to customize.
Yeah, I can understand that. All right. We answered this one. Does the nopCommerce team still read and answer forum questions? We got that. Can we have identity server integration with nopCommerce? Probably
yes,
as a plugin.
you can.
Yes, you can.
Yes,
Yeah. It is possible, yes. But it's not on the roadmap, I'm taking it, right? Why is there little to no documentation on creating nopCommerce themes? That's, creating themes in nopCommerce is one of those things that, you kind of just have to dive into it, and there isn't a lot of good information out there right now outside of just kind of, I would say when it comes to the architecture being documented, whether it's videos or whatever, creating themes is probably an area that could use some help from, not necessarily just from the nopCommerce team, but really from the community as a whole on how to really approach it, creating a theme. So, I mean, that's after digging into a lot of documentation, unless there's something I'm missing out there when it comes to theme development. Andrei, do you have anything to add to that?
If we are talking about theme development, we have one article on our documentation about how you can create a new theme, how you can upload it, and what you should do, what files you should edit. Actually, that's it. You don't need any other information. All the other information you need is HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I'm not sure. We are not going to write new documentation for HTML or CSS.
Yeah, I see what you're
So
saying. It's more so those skills that you're kind of just applying the creativity of your typical
You-
HTML, CSS.
you don't need any specific nopCommerce skills to develop a new theme.
That's a good point.
Just some basic ASP.NET skills, and all the rest is HTML, CSS, JavaScript.
Cool. All right, how can I have product attributes that contain custom attributes so we can freely adjust based on our needs? So date, time, two sets of things.
I think we can skip it.
I think that's something that could be more clarified even in a forum thing, because that'd be a great conversation of what is really needed to make managing product attributes a little more flexible. Does nopCommerce have a measurement unit conversion option? Thought it does,
Yes.
but go on.
Yes, it does. Of course.
Okay. I sell in meters. So his workaround is tier prices for the conversion.
I'm
sound
not
like
sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either.
There is
Here's one. How about what AJ has here? Will there be an easy way to sort by best sellers?
I know there is a plugin for sorting by bestsellers. Maybe we should create a work item for this option. Let's just make this suggestion posted on our forums or GitHub.
All right, how are we doing on time? Oh, we have 8 minutes left. All right, so maybe I'm going to see if we can get all the remaining questions on the screen. And we could pop through these kind of quick if you'd like, your choice. Why are categories displayed, breadcrumb and other areas, based on alphanumeric instead of display order? Okay. It might be a bug, I'm not sure.
I think we should discuss it on our forums. This question's a little bit technical. I see a good question from Peter Larson. Question number 38.
All right, I'm going to jump onto that one. Then maybe we'll come back up to one of these other ones. Okay, how about that one? Has there been any performance tests done between SQL Server and MySQL when it comes to running NOP?
Before answering this question, I just want to say a big hi to Peter. I know Peter. Peter hasn't missed any of our conferences. So Peter, if you hear me, I'm saying a big hi to you. Hello. Back to your question. No, there was no any performance test about MySQL and MySQL, Microsoft SQL. No. But I think, let me write it down. We will do it soon. Our idea was to, when we decided to implement MySQL support, was to give people some choice between two databases and to have some vector support. That was our main idea, but we haven't done any performance tests yet. I think we will.
I'm going to jump up to these other ones. They seem like a pretty good yes, no, if they're on the roadmap or not. Do we have any improvement on the flyout cart? There's more 10 products. In other words, is there any aspects to revisit the flyout cart? And
so I think it's no improvements, but I think it can also be asked on our forums.
Sounds good.
And the next one.
Yeah, any plan for category selection simplification?
it can also be asked on our forums.
Yeah, I mean, these are great things to add to the forums, and they will be addressed. So I'm just going to keep making notes. All right, let's see. Please, all right, please explain how the caching works in nopCommerce. This feels like it would be a talk in itself. Is there anything you want to add to the caching that, for what I covered in the presentation? Is there anything that's worth adding?
You've talked about everything.
Very good. Well, it does seem like when it comes to caching, it's just not something you can just flip a switch on. At least that's really what I kind of gathered in going through the code. It's, there's strategic areas on where and how you put in caching, because I mean, the more caching you can put in, then, great, but then there might be other downsides to that. So yeah, a walkthrough of caching and really kind of digging in deep on scenarios of why it's valuable in certain areas would be a great talk. Actually, it's a bigger conversation, but I think a lot of people are always wanting to make things faster. So let's see. All right, we have 3 minutes left, and we're going to try to hold you to time here. Will there be an easier way to upgrade plugins in the future? You did address some of that already, that you're going to work towards something to make plugins easier. Is there any more you want to add to that?
I think it could be possible, but only if all third-party plugin vendors decide to store plugins on our marketplace. Otherwise, it won't be possible to implement some kind of upgrades or so on. But it's one of our work items on our roadmap. We're going to prepare some infrastructure for automatic upgrades, plugin upgrades in admin area in the next version. We're thinking about it.
Gotcha. So this next one. So now if I want to add a new table through a plugin, will I have to add it manually to the database? And the answer is no, you would use the newer migrations, correct? So the aspect of using fluent migrations is becoming more prevalent across different database objects. All right, as a developer, what's the best place to learn and jump? We kind of addressed this earlier. Here's a great question. I have this question too. Matthew brings up, there was talk in 2018 of a NOP CMS being made. What happened?
We changed our mind. Actually, we understood that it would be too time consuming for us. We should better focus on nopCommerce. If we decide to implement both, nothing good will happen with nopCommerce. So it's better to focus on one product right now.
Got it. All right. So when it comes to adding Docker support, are you moving towards a microservice architecture? I'm assuming not anytime soon, but feel free to answer that.
Yeah. Most probably yes, but a little bit later.
Okay.
Yes. So the question is, will you do it in the future? Yes, but we don't know when this future will come.
All right. Let's see. We're very close to being out. Let's see if we can just knock these out really quick. I want to ask about concurrent user performance, and NOP uses high CPU when there's a lot of visitors. Is there any improvements when it comes to, when it comes to dealing with load on the server?
Yes, we did several performance tests, and yes, it's about 20-30% faster. It depends on I don't know how to say. It depends on how exactly you are going to test it. What pages are open? It depends on on how your solution is customized, how is it configured, what settings are enabled or disabled. It depends on many specific things. So
Yeah, this is a big, this is a talk. This is a big question there, but I could see where things would just be naturally improved. Yeah.
But it's fast. 4.30, it's faster.
Yes, I would agree. We talked about the APIs, and let's see, when it comes to integrating with other CMS systems like Embraco, is there a recommended CMS for integration? Because of course there's Embraco, we get WordPress, there's a lot of other ones out there. Is it still kind of up to, is there a certain recommended CMS that's out there from the nopCommerce team?
I think Embraco is not one of the best. I think it's the best content management system right now.
Yeah.
There was an integration several years ago between nopCommerce and Embraco, but the problem is that it was too complex to deploy it. You had two websites, one nopCommerce, one Embraco, too complex logic and so on. So, and it wasn't really demanded by our community. So that's why the original developer decided not to support it anymore.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see, another question. Conditional checkout attributes. I think that's a good, I don't say a forum like directly, but I don't know, is there anything you want to share about that? It seems pretty specific. All right, let's take these last two. What is Grand Node? It looks like a copy of NOP. I have no idea what Grand Node is. So do you know what it is, Andrei?
Yes, of course, I know this product, and I know its developers, and you all also know about them. It's Not For You team. It's one of the most popular plugin vendors on our marketplace and our solution partner. And it's really based on nopCommerce.
Okay.
So
interesting.
It was originally based on nopCommerce, and you can check it.
Okay.
But
I wasn't aware of it, so that's new to me. All right, last one. Can you share the fastest configuration to run nopCommerce at its peak performance and speed terms? Boy, that's a whole talk in itself.
I can.
But you can, okay.
Yes, but it will be some website specific. If you give me a source code of some website, you give me some server configuration, I can make it. Our team, any good nopCommerce developer can make it really, really fast. But it depends on a specific website, on specific customization, on catalog, how many products you have, and so on, localization or not.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. All right, that's the end of our Q&A. We just went a little bit over. I'm surprised we got through all of this. Good thing we started a little early. Is there anything more you want to share, Andrei, with the attendees?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. It's really great, especially considering that we don't have a conference this year.
So, yeah, hopefully it kind of fills a little of the void. So, of course, you're welcome to join us. You're welcome to join us on future meetups, and I hope you will. So those attending right now, please reach out to me if you want to give a talk or sponsor the meetup. We won't have Andrei for Q&As every meetup. This is just a special thing for this today.
People are asking for office photos or show our office, please. Do you want to see our office?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's do that. Feel free to show us around.
Let me see. So, do you see that?
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen first.
Oh, wait a second. So, this is a room for negotiations. So when I go out, what I can see, Here is my daughter waiting for me, a little bit tired.
But being patient.
Yeah. Here is our kitchen. We have some sofas, a table. We can sit here, discuss something during lunch. Just a casual kitchen. So, and here's our main room, our little library, and many tables. Our managers, marketing guys sit here. You can see a lot of other tables. It's empty right now because everyone is at home already. Everyone actually sits here. I also sit here, actually right here. This is my table. So this is how it looks like.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Andrei. Definitely appreciate you hanging out with us, and I'm sure your daughter's ready to go play or get out of there. So
I have to buy several new Lego for her right now.
yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for attending.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop the video here shortly, and yeah, hope to see everybody at next month's meetup. And the talk will get posted once it's noted. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Andrei.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
you.
Take care.
Thanks, Andrei. Thanks, everyone.